Hi everyone. So my friends Chris and Megan are back from vacation. I am at their house right now and we are going to have the little intervention that I was mentioning in the video when we were assessing their plants and doing a lot of repotting, rescuing some plants, etc. So we're going to start off with just asking them some questions about how their plant care has been up until now. We're going to then discuss perhaps some better ways to do things moving forward. But first of all, let me just introduce them. So this is Megan and Chris, and I will splice in some footage of their adorable dog, Theo, for you, who is asleep by our feet. Okay, you guys. So obviously you've watched the video. Some things were not great. So I know that when I told you there were some things wrong, that Chris, you had said, I guess watering my plants once a week wasn't enough. So I want to start there and ask, were you just watering all the plants on the same day each week?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so that is problem number one. I was kind of worried when you said that, but interestingly enough, like a lot of your plants didn't seem like they were being watered once a week. So I think there was actually a little bit more of a concern of, for me at least, of how exactly you were watering your plants. So I'm going to grab one of the plants and I want you to kind of explain to me how you were watering it. Okay, so this is a snake plant that I replanted for you into, now it's in a nursery pot, in a cover pot. So we're just gonna pretend that it was still planted directly in that pot, which we know has no drainage hole because I'm sure you were protecting your floors. So how are you watering this?
I would just grab a cup and put some water in it.
So approximately how much water were you adding when you were watering it, do you think?
Oh, whenever it just didn't really look that dry.
Okay, so this is kind of what my concern was, and this kind of validates everything. So like I said, a lot of your plants didn't look like they were being watered once a week. And interestingly enough, the fact that you haven't overwatered your plants is saying something, because a lot of your plants, like your succulents, like you probably go almost a month for some of these without watering them if you were watering them thoroughly enough each time you watered. So that's really where I think the biggest thing was. It wasn't the frequency. Actually, you probably were helping yourself by underwatering your plants given your frequency. So I think what it was is you weren't getting enough water in there and you weren't thoroughly saturating the soil. And so that's kind of, it's a hard thing to do when you're planting directly into a pot that doesn't have a drainage hole, because you don't know when to stop, right? Or you stop too late and now you've got like a puddle of mud for your plants, which is not good. So that's part of the reason that I wanted to get all of your plants that were in no drainage situations into a drainage situation. Now, interestingly enough, the ones that you had planted in clear planters, you've done pretty well with, but I'm guessing that's because you can actually see through the side and you were better able to tell like when to stop watering.
Yeah, I didn't actually plant those. So those, yeah, they came like that from a birthday party or something like that. So we grabbed 2 of those.
Well, they're doing well. So I think like what you're doing with those is probably good, because like I said, you're probably better able to see, because if you're telling me now that you were watering the ones such as in that planter and you were waiting until it looked wet, it could be totally dry pockets underneath there and it just, the top started to look wet because it absorbed more quickly and the bottom could have been completely dry. Versus with those clear ones, you can look through the side and be like, oh, well, it's still not wet on the bottom, and you can add some more. So I think that honestly was the biggest problem. But the other problem we need to address is your plants are not all gonna need to be watered on the same day. Some of them may need to be watered on the same day, but in general, we don't blanket water. Like we don't have one day where we always go and water, because your plants are gonna dry out at different rates. So you have, for example, your 2 snake plants that are looking their best right now. This one that we have right in front of us is living in an east-facing window, and it is, I guess it's about 4 feet back from an east-facing window. Your other one is living directly in a southern-facing window. So it's gonna use up its water more quickly if they were in the same size pot. That's another caveat. This one over here is in a slightly larger pot, so technically it should take slightly longer to dry out, but once again, it's in brighter light, so it could dry out more quickly than the other one. So really it just depends on the plant, and I think that's kind of where I was at, was you just need to kind of figure out how to understand how to check your plants for when they need to be watered. So I think what I wanna do now is take you around and kind of go in place where some of the plants are right now and explain to you kind of the best way to go about checking them and determining if they need to be watered. Okay, so over here we have the larger of the snake plants. So when you're trying to evaluate if your plants need to be watered, the first thing I want you to do is stick your finger. You're gonna do this, Chris. Stick your finger down in the soil about an inch or two, however far you can go down, and see if it feels wet. So I'm pretty sure you watered this one since you've been back, so it's wet, yes?
Somewhat.
Somewhat, okay. So the next thing you want to do, if you're like, I'm not sure yet, pick up the plant now that it is in a cover pot and see how it feels. You want to hold his. Yep.
Thank you, Vanna.
So you're going to start to realize after a while, you're going to start to recognize the weight of your plants and how it feels right after you've watered it in terms of the weight. And you're going to be able to pick up and be like, okay, that feels really light. But also what you just did, lift it up again and look at the bottom of it, is an excellent thing to do too, because if the drainage holes are big enough, you can kind of see and judge if the soil looks lighter in color or whatnot. So if you determine, okay, it feels pretty dry to the touch, it feels pretty light, I know it's been, a while since I watered it, obviously, you're gonna be like, okay, it needs to be watered. But another thing I really want you to look out for on your plants is physical signs that they're thirsty, because a lot of your plants had physical signs that they were thirsty. So if you're still not sure, because snake plants do like to dry all the way out between waterings, if you're not sure if they look pruny, if their leaves look wrinkled and pruny, it needs water. So I'm pretty sure if we get up here close right now, I'm not seeing any of the pruniness that I was seeing on these plants at the time that I repotted them. So they're doing pretty good right now, but all of them were pruny when I was here. So that's definitely a good thing. So I usually do things in the order that I just told you there. I basically stick my finger in. Well, first I check, I think when was the last time I watered this, right? If I know I watered it 3 days ago, it probably didn't need watering. But I'm like, oh, it's been at least over a week. I'll stick my finger in, I'll pick it up, see how the pot feels. I'll look at the plant for symptoms that it's looking thirsty, and then I make my determination. Let's revisit some other plants that have different watering requirements, because this is kind of what I'm getting at. Okay, so this new Raven ZZ plant that I got you is an excellent one to use to demonstrate what I was just talking about. So we do have this potted in the exact same pot. It's in the same type of substrate, but this plant is going to be able to go a whole lot longer between waterings than that snake plant we just looked at. You do not want to be watering this plant more than once every 30 days. In the summertime, I water mine. Sometimes I go almost 3 months in between watering, which seems crazy, right? But this plant has giant tubers that store water, and it's very succulent. So these real thick stems and everything here are all storing water. So you don't want to overwater this plant. It's the worst thing you could do. But if you notice, I left some of the tubers visible on top here, and some people might think I'm a little crazy when I say this, but I wait until I see wrinkly balls. When the plant's balls start to get a little wrinkly, like it's a little pruny, that's usually a good indication that it's using up its water stores, because that's where it's storing all of its extra water. So that's kind of my judgment. And then obviously you also want to look at the stems and everything too, because they can start to get a little bit pruny. But I'm telling you right now, this is like your ideal plant, or maybe Megan's ideal plant.
My ideal plant,
where you don't really have to do much to it very frequently at all. So so many people kill these plants because they water them massively too frequently.
My kind of plant once a month.
Max 30 days. I mean, minimum 30 days, you know what I'm trying to say, between waterings. Okay, we can put that one back and we'll look at our next one. Okay, so then I did move your little pothos here, which, by the way, was this a gift from someone?
I thought so. Yeah, from Natalie.
And then we have the Dracaena over here. These two plants have similar care requirements, which is another reason I wanted to move them together over here, because now they're in the same lighting. They're in similar sized pots. They are probably going to be plants that you will end up noticing they need to be watered on the same day, right? So these do want to dry all the way out as well, but once they've dried all the way out, they want water. They don't want to go very far past that. They don't store a lot of extra water in their leaves, because as you can see, these are much thinner, more pliable leaves than your snake plant, than the other plant we were just looking at. And they will go limp, like the leaves will start to lose their turgor, but we don't want to let it get to that point. So this is basically the same situation where you're just going to want to check the soil, see if it feels dry when you put your finger in there, see how light the pot feels. You can see through the drainage hole in that one for sure if the soil is dried out. And then thoroughly water it. And we're going to talk about what I mean by thoroughly water here in a second after we talk about kind of the care requirements for the plants. So that's really all there is to those. I mean, honestly, I'm shocked that Dracaena's been doing fabulously. It's doing great. So, should continue to do good.
Well, that one is in a plastic pot.
I know, see?
I
The
didn't take
one
it
that
out.
was in the plastic pot is doing good. Okay, so let's go back into the kitchen and let's talk about your actual succulents. Okay, so with your succulents, it's kind of like the Raven ZZ plant where the soil can dry all the way out and the plant won't need to be watered because it's storing all of the water, excess water and everything in its leaves. So these are all desert type plants, right? They're used to living in places where it maybe rains once a month. So you got to keep that in mind. With my succulents, depending on what kind of lighting they're in, 20 days at least between waterings, some of them 30. I don't usually go past 30 because they will start to feel squishy. So that is kind of how I judge it. I do the same thing that we've been talking about, like, is the soil dry? How long has it been since I watered it? And then I start squeezing leaves. I'm like, they still feel nice and firm. Everything feels nice and firm. Nothing looks pruny. Nothing's doing anything funky. But around the time it needs to be watered, those leaves will start to feel a little bit softer. You'll see the ones lower at the bottom will start to look a little bit pruny. And that's usually a good indication that it's time to water them. Now, your Haworthia here is a little bit different. They tend to want a little bit more water than your Echeverias do. So I had my Echeveria was in probably a pot half this size in a southern facing window, which this is east. So it's going to take longer to dry out than what mine was doing. But mine, I could only go about 10 days between watering my Haworthia that's about this size, right? So this one will probably need to be watered more frequently. With this one, I just wait till the soil dries out. And when it's completely dried out, you can go ahead and water it. It's not going to have like a freak out over it. But these, what will happen is if you water them too soon, they'll try to put more water in these leaves and the leaves will actually burst.
Oh no.
So this good news is you have not been overwatering. Overwatering is the #1 killer of plants, by the way. So at least you're not overwatering.
Look at us. That's a gold star.
Plants can come back from underwatering much, much easier. So
Do these not need the same type of drainage hole?
they do, which is why in the video I had recommended that you replant these into something with drainage.
But they're so cute.
Oh, but you just use this as a cash pot, a cover pot.
Cash pot.
I brought you a square pot today that I think will fit in there.
Thank you.
So I thought about these things.
Thank you.
All right. Another thing to keep in mind too is how clean your plants are is going to dictate how well they can use the sunlight and how quickly they're going to need to be watered.
Yeah.
And your plants were dirty, dirty, dirty. So I want you to get in the habit of...
We're not dirty people.
I want you to get into the habit of when you're watering your plants, like we'll go for like, I'd say once a month. So even if you're only watering a plant once a month, well, why don't we just move into the how you should be watering your plants in general phase? Because Chris did ask me something while we weren't on camera in the other room about, well, can I just water the plant here and, till little runs in the drainage tray below it? And I said no, because I want to make sure that we are thoroughly watering the plants given what's been going on. So let's go to the kitchen sink. We have a plant that needs to be watered, and we're going to have you water it the more appropriate way. Okay, so I did just find out, you guys, they do have a watering can, but they have it outside for their outdoor plants. Chris has just been using a cup to water, like he said. So the problem is the plants hadn't been getting thoroughly watered. So when you're watering, Chris, you want to make sure you are 100% saturating that plant until water is just running through that drainage hole big time. So since you don't have an indoor watering can, you can just do it directly at your sink. So we know this needs to be watered. Let's just turn the sink on with your fancy touch sink and go ahead and just stick the plant under there and make sure you're moving it around so that the soil's getting evenly
So what temperature?
watered. So make sure it is room temperature water, or it can be slightly cold. You don't want ice cold water. You don't want hot water.
Not too hard.
Yeah, and you don't want it to be too hard because it's going to displace your soil. Once that feels okay, and you can move the leaves out of the way if you need to. You just want to get it everywhere around on that soil until you start to see the water run through the bottom. And as you can see, that's taking a while. So this demonstrates when you were doing, so we do now have water coming through the bottom. So you kind of see now when you were just using the cup, you probably weren't putting enough water.
Probably not.
Right, exactly. So now you're just gonna let that drain, and you have this lovely little rack in here, so you can always just set it there and let it drain and then put it back when it's done. But if you are actually trying to drain them to put them back right away, a little helpful tip is pick up your plant again, tilt it on its side a little bit and just lift it up and down, and that will help to get all of the water out, because there is something called a water table in your soil. So if you just hold it upright like this, a lot of the water just sits there. And if you tilt it to the side, it helps to drain it out. But this is how you should be watering every single plant. You want to thoroughly saturate it. And when you do thoroughly saturate it like that, you're going to find a lot of them you're not going to need to be watering once a week. Your watering is going to become way less frequent. You're going to have so much for free time. What are you going to do with all this free time, Chris?
Play more video games.
Okay, so another issue that I had was that a lot of your plants were very, very dirty. So easy way to resolve this is when you need to water a plant, such as this one that we just checked, and it definitely needs to be watered, is to just set your sink to the sprayer setting. Make sure it's not too crazy, that's good. And then just water your plant under that, because it's gonna wash off your leaves as you do it. So now the plant's getting watered and cleaned at the same time. Try to be careful not to run your soil out, but I gave you some extra so you can top it off if you need to. And then that's that. That's basically all there is to it. Now with your bigger plants, it can be a little bit more difficult because obviously your snake plant is super tall, but you have 2 showers in this house. Plant people regularly put their plants in the shower. It's a thing. It's a thing we do. So you might need to start giving your plants a little bit of a shower now.
Okay.
So hopefully this is all making a little bit more sense now in terms of how to care for the plants. But another thing that I want to talk about too, because Meghan had mentioned this a second ago, was how do you know when you need to repot the plant? So as long as everything looks like it's going okay with your plant, you don't need to take it out of its plastic pot that it's in, or any of the ones that you still have in decorative pots with drainage. You don't need to take them out as long as everything looks like it's going fine. If you ever start to see a decline in your plants, for example, the one snake plant that was not doing so great, then you're going to want to take it out and check the roots, because as you might have noticed watching that video, every single thing that was wrong with any of the plants was related to the roots. And it was mostly that they were way too dry. They had desiccated the roots. And then because some of them had gotten so desiccated, so in the example of that one snake plant, when it gets totally dry, you get something called dry rot. So with overwatering, the roots get deprived of oxygen because the soil is just too wet and they can't breathe. And then they turn to mush and rot and nasty, and bacteria takes over and everything. Well, the opposite of that is what we call dry rot. So the roots get completely dried out to the point that when the water is added, they can't rehydrate. Basically, they become completely useless. And they sit there though in that water, and then bacteria forms around them, bacteria gets into your other roots, and you get rot as well. Luckily, you hadn't gotten to the dry rot problem on most of your plants. You had a little bit on the one snake plant, the largest snake plant, but it was just at the very bottom of the root ball, so I could trim it off easily. But that one snake plant had gotten so bad that the stem had started to rot. So that is the worst case scenario. So unless you see things going wrong, you don't need to take the plant out. If they are going wrong, you want to take it out and see if you have some kind of rot situation going on. But also, as Meghan was saying, when do we know how to just repot them if they're doing fine? If your plant gets too root bound, you can start to see a decline in your plant. It can start to lose leaves, have stunted growth. Mostly though, it will be the older leaves that it's killing off. Really, your biggest concern if leaves are dying is if the newer leaves are dying off. That's usually a sign rot or something has gone on, because it's natural for old leaves to die off eventually. But if your plant is super root bound and ready for a repot, it's really going to start killing off the old leaves because it just can't get enough nutrients from the water and everything to really sustain itself. So at that point, if you see a lot of older leaves are dying off more quickly, you can slip the plant out of the pot and see if it's root bound. If it's just massive tangle of roots in there, then yes, it's time to take it up to a slightly larger pot. You only want to go up one size. So for example, the plant over there is in a 6-inch pot. You would want to take it up to an 8-inch pot. Now, I just released a video the day that we are filming this about if you don't have space to go up to a bigger pot, you can do something called root pruning. So you basically will just trim the roots, kind of like how if your foliage got too big, you would trim it, to keep it in check. You trim the roots, no more than a third of the roots off, and you pot it back up into the same pot and trim the foliage. Well, it'll kill some of its foliage off to kind of balance out that ratio of roots to foliage. You could also trim some of the foliage off to help it if you wanted to. In my experience, it'll do it on its own. And then you can leave it in the same spot that you had it in. So those are kind of your options. But if the plant is just in general looking healthy, it's not killing off leaves, probably once a year you might want to slip it out of its pot anyway, just to see if it's massively root bound. Some of your plants are going to get more root bound more quickly than others. For example, a pothos that thing's going to root out like mad, right? But some of your other plants, like your succulents, because it's such a fine root system, even when they get root bound, they don't look root bound. Like, you're going to go a long time before you need to repot most of your succulents. Now, your ones that are in 2-inch pots, a little bit different because we're just starting the root system, right? So they're going to grow a little bit more quickly. But your aloe, you're probably going to go a few years in between repotting that plant, as long as everything's going okay.
And we call you to help anytime that happens.
Chris is like, hey, we're going on vacation. You want to come repot all my plants again?
Here's a good video.
So yeah, that is basically all you know about that. But another thing I want you to do right now, I don't know was Chris's phone over there? Can you hand Chris his phone? Since we've established that Chris does most of the plant care.
Planty guy.
So I want you to download an app called
Don't give it to her.
Planta. So you're going to download that. It will be the free version, which I think the things you need to use are available in the free version. But basically, you're going to be able to add your plants to that app. And I want you to not only just add all of your plants to the app, I want you to take pictures of them, because this will help too. If you see something going funky with your plant, you can reference the picture from today and be like, oh yeah, definitely wasn't doing that back then. But it's also nice too, because you can see how much your plant grows over time, right? But what you're mainly going to use this for is every time you water your plant, you're going to go into the plant, click a little button that says watered it today. And then over time, you're going to start to notice there's going to be a pattern. You're going to see that typically you're going the same number of days in between watering each plant that you put in there, but it's going to be different for most of the plants. And it will just help you kind of get used to how long you're actually needing to go. And then it will get to the point where even with, I forget how many 106 plants in my permanent collection now, I could literally walk you through my house right now and I could tell you that plant is approximately every 10 days, that plant is approximately every 15 days between watering. And I know that because I use this app and I just get used to it. Now, if you do repot your plants, that's going to change, because when you go to a larger pot, it's going to take longer for it to dry out, right?
Knowledge.
So just know, but none of these are needing to have an up pot or anything anytime soon.
Crisis averted.
But other things to keep in mind are if it was, the sun is coming back out as we speak right now. Like, I know it got a little overcast while I was driving over here. But if it's been raining, so let's say all next week, it just rained every single day, your plants aren't going to be getting as much light. You're going to find that if you normally have to go about 10 days between watering it, you might end up having to go 12 or 13 days because it just didn't use up the water because there was no light, because it was just pitch black raining outside. Not pitch black, but you know what I mean. Gray, rainy. It's just not getting what it needs. Now, if we just have one day of rain, then they're going to make a big difference, right? But another thing to keep in mind too is that the sun tracks differently throughout the seasons. So your southern facing windows here in the kitchen, we're moving into the time of year where the sun is going to stop coming direct through here. The sun is going to track over to this side of your house. So these plants aren't going to be getting as bright of light, but they will be getting more hours of light throughout the day. So with a lot of my plants in my southern facing window, I find that I actually have to water them more frequently in the winter than I do in the summer, because they're getting all that direct light coming through the windows in the winter. So you might notice that kind of shift with your plants. Your ones in your east facing window, you probably will end up having to water a little more frequently just because they're getting more hours of light per day. The intensity level of the light will be the same in an east facing window. West facing, just because it's so hot where we are, you might have to water them more frequently in the summer because it's just going to be heating up more and drying out more quickly. But that's another thing in the winter, if you're having to run the heat, like if we have another bad winter storm like we did in 2021 and your heat's going nonstop, it'll dry out your soil more quickly in your house. So it will change throughout the year, but that app will help you get a general idea of kind of the standard number of days. And then you just use everything else I talked to you about, sticking your finger in there, kind of feeling how light it is to kind of judge if it actually needs to be watered or if it can wait a few days.
Okay.
But hopefully most of this has made sense to you. Hopefully
Yes.
you feel a little better prepared to
Yes.
take care of your plants. So the last piece of advice I'm going to leave you with before we wrap up here is the next time you go on vacation, you need to check and water your plants before you leave. And if they're going to need to be watered while you're gone, you have my number.
Thank you, Drea. We really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you guys letting me come and take over your house while you were gone and everything. So hopefully our viewers have enjoyed this video as well as the original video. If so, please be sure to click that like and or subscribe button down below. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next time. Aloha.
She's a real YouTuber.
No.
I love it.
Welcome to Plant Talk with Chris and Meghan. They're not dead.
They're dusty, not crusty.
But did you die?
The plants are alive, except for maybe one that's dying.
Rubber baby buggy bumpers.
Rubber baby buggy
bumpers. Sally sells.
Okay, come on. We're burning daylight.